Most people think royal scandals are dramatic, but nothing comes close to the financial storm that followed Sarah Ferguson. Imagine living in a world where luxury isn't just normal, it's expected. A world where designer shopping sprees, private trainers, and banquets big enough to feed an army are just part of daily life. And then imagine watching that world collapse around you, one unpaid bill at a time. For years, she managed to keep the illusion alive, smiling for cameras, charming crowds, and pretending everything was under control. But behind the scenes, the truth was spiraling fast. Debts piling up, creditors closing in, bailouts quietly arranged, and a lifestyle so extreme that even palace insiders were stunned by what they saw. This is the story of how someone surrounded by privilege, connections, and endless opportunities still managed to fall into one of the most shocking financial messes the royal world has ever seen. And trust me, the real details are far more unbelievable than the headlines ever showed. If you enjoy deep dives into stories the public was never supposed to see, make sure to subscribe, because this one only gets wilder from here. When Sarah Ferguson first entered the royal world, she carried an energy that felt almost refreshing. She was warm, funny, and unmistakably herself, someone who didn't seem molded by palace expectations. To the public, she looked like the perfect mix of approachable charm and royal glamour, the kind of personality that could brighten even the stiffest traditions. But behind that easy smile was a growing pressure most people never saw. The moment she stepped into the royal circle, she stepped into a life where appearances weren't just important, they were everything. Every outfit, every gesture, every event came with an unspoken cost. And for someone who loved being generous, who enjoyed giving, hosting, and indulging others, that pressure only fueled habits she couldn't sustain. She wanted to keep up with a lifestyle she believed was expected of her: lavish gifts, stylish wardrobes, endless social commitments, the kind of spending that for many in royal circles was simply absorbed into the background. But for her, it wasn't. Even in the early days, small signs hinted that her relationship with money was already slipping out of control. And those early cracks, they were only the beginning of something much bigger. Because while the world admired her charm, the lifestyle behind it was growing faster than anyone realized, and it was about to take on a life of its own. Once Sarah settled into royal life, her spending didn't just grow, it accelerated at a pace no one around her could believe. What began as occasional indulgence quickly turned into a full-scale lifestyle, one built on excess rather than need. Staff members later described scenes that sounded less like daily living and more like a set from a historical drama. Nightly dinners laid out like feasts, enough food for a dozen people, even when only a few were at home. Roasts, whole birds, entire spreads that were barely touched before being cleared away the next morning. And that was only one small corner of her routine. Shopping became another world of its own. Assistants were reportedly sent out every few days to pick up beauty products, luxury creams, and new cosmetics, items added to her account without a second thought. High-end department stores saw her name so often that bills ran into tens of thousands. One store alone claimed she owed more than many people earn in a year, all from daily pickups she barely kept track of. Then came the personal trainers, hairdressers, beauty specialists, people paid hundreds just to stay available. One trainer was reportedly given a full annual salary for almost no work at all, simply because they were expected to remain on standby, and even when she wasn't using them, the payments kept flowing. But the spending didn't stop at services. Her homes operated like small estates, with staff hired for tasks that barely existed. Lavish routines, constant deliveries, and a revolving door of expenses she rarely questioned. Everything was built around the assumption that the money would always be there.
that a new deal, a new opportunity, or someone else's help would cover whatever came next. But this life of comfort had a shadow, because while the luxury grew louder, the warning signs were getting harder to ignore. And the moment those unpaid bills started piling up, the illusion of control shattered, revealing just how deep the financial trouble had become.
It didn't happen all at once. At first, the unpaid bills were small, overlooked invoices, forgotten tabs, the kind of mistakes anyone with a hectic schedule might miss. But the difference was scale. These weren't £50 oversights or a late phone bill. These were luxury charges, month after month, stacked on top of each other until the numbers stopped making sense. By the early 1990s, the situation had slipped far beyond casual spending. One morning, Sarah received a demand from Coutts Bank, £500,000 due in just 14 days. Not a suggestion, not a polite reminder, a hard deadline. And behind that, more debts hid in the shadows, waiting to surface. Creditors were calling, suppliers were refusing service. Local shops that once welcomed her with open arms began cutting her off after unpaid tabs stretched into the thousands. Even inside palace circles, the tension was rising. Quiet conversations hinted that the Queen herself had stepped in more than once, covering massive bills without publicity. These weren't symbolic gestures, they were personal bailouts designed to stop a full financial collapse from spilling into the press. But even those interventions couldn't keep up with the pace of the spending. Her staff saw the strain up close. Salaries were late, then missing entirely. Some employees went months without pay, hoping things would stabilize. Instead, the opposite happened. Layoffs swept through her household. Long-time drivers, assistants, dressers, people who had been with her for years were suddenly dismissed as the financial walls closed in. Meanwhile, the outside world began to notice. Newspapers broke stories that revealed just how deep the hole had become. Stories of unpaid cleaners, overdue rent, and creditors waiting in lines that seemed endless. Each headline chipped away at the glamour she once carried so easily. And still, the bills kept rising. Then came the real blow, a revelation that her debts had reached into the millions. Nearly £3.7 million owed, spread across banks, stores, services, and private agreements. The scale was staggering, far beyond what any public image could hide. The life she once controlled had flipped. Instead of a world of comfort, she was now navigating a maze of arrears, damaged relationships, and growing pressure from every direction. The illusion had cracked open, and now everyone could see what was underneath. But as the debts mounted, Sarah wasn't ready to give up. Instead, she turned towards something else, something she hoped would rebuild everything she had lost. And that next move would take her story in an entirely different direction.
With the debts closing in and the headlines growing louder, Sarah pivoted into survival mode. The days of unchecked spending were over, replaced by a scramble to rebuild her public image and patch the financial chaos dragging behind her. But the fixes she reached for weren't simple. They came with their own complications and sometimes their own price tags. She began signing on to every opportunity that promised quick income: brand partnerships, endorsements, speaking gigs, television appearances, anything that could pull her back into the spotlight while bringing in cash. Some ventures helped, at least on the surface. Others fell apart just as quickly as they appeared, weighed down by bad management or unrealistic expectations. It became a cycle. Sign a deal, hope it solves the problem, then watch the money vanish faster than it arrived. Then came the business ventures. Some were ambitious, others a little unusual, and many never delivered what she hoped. She tried to carve out new identities: author, spokesperson, lifestyle figure, charity advocate. To her credit, she threw herself into the work, determined to prove she still had value beyond the scandals. But every attempt to reinvent herself was met with the shadow of the debts behind her. Even as she tried to move forward, the past kept pulling her back. And there were moments when it seemed like each step forward triggered another step back. A potential breakthrough would be followed by a damaging headline. A promising partnership would clash with old obligations. Palace insiders whispered about her difficulties, while journalists searched for the next misstep. It didn't matter how hard she tried, the reputational weight was never far from sight. Yet through it all, one thing kept her afloat: persistence. She didn't disappear, didn't retreat from public life, didn't allow the pressure to silence her. She leaned into charity work, traveled, spoke at events, and used whatever platform she could to reshape the narrative. And slowly, she carved out a presence that wasn't defined solely by scandal. But even as she fought to rebuild, the larger story never fully faded, because no matter how many new roles she embraced, the question lingered in the background: had she truly escaped her past, or was she constantly trying to outrun it? And that question leads to something much deeper, something that reveals the real heart of her entire journey.
When you step back from the headlines, the unpaid bills, and the endless stories of excess, Sarah Ferguson's journey becomes something far more revealing than a tale of overspending. It exposes the pressure of maintaining an image in a world where appearances matter more than reality. A world where generosity can turn into obligation, where confidence hides insecurity, and where trying to keep up can quietly pull you under. Her story shows how easy it is to get trapped in the illusion of wealth, especially when you're surrounded by people who seem to live without limits. She wasn't the only one indulging, but she was one of the few who didn't have the financial foundation to support it. Instead of adjusting, she doubled down. Instead of pulling back, she pushed harder. And the gap between who she was and who she pretended to be grew wider every year. Some people look at her and see someone reckless, someone who ignored every warning and expected others to clean up the mess. Others see a woman trying to survive in an environment built on judgment and perfection, where a single misstep can define you for decades. They see someone who was generous to a fault, impulsive and eager to please, and those traits, when placed under the glare of royal expectations, spiraled into disaster. But the most telling part of her story is how she kept going even after losing almost everything tied to her royal identity. Long after the privileges faded, long after creditors had stepped in, long after the palace had distanced itself, she was still pushing forward, still reinventing, still refusing to disappear. Because at its core, this isn't just a financial cautionary tale, it's a story about identity, how easily it can be built on illusions, and how hard it is to reclaim once those illusions break. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the lives and moments the public never really gets to see. And let me know in the comments, do you think her downfall was self-inflicted, or was she simply overwhelmed by the world she married into? Your take might just shape the next video.